Hello, hello, and welcome to another installment of Leninhawk Talk, my podcasty type audio-only videos that I put up on YouTube, because that's my format I'm familiar with. So normally these episodes are about movies, and this one is also about movies to a certain extent, but this is going to get a little bit more personal for me, so if you're not interested in that, feel free to drop off. But if you'd like to learn a little bit more about me, specifically about this topic in me, feel free to keep listening. So I'm recording this a few days before Thanksgiving. And sometimes I get the question of, well, what do you do for Thanksgiving? Especially this year because I'm newly single. So people assume that I spent Thanksgiving with, my now ex-fiance. And now I don't have anywhere, so people are kind of asking that question in general, but you kind of sense that they're also asking about this year specifically. But my answer is pretty general. So, since 2001, my general Thanksgiving tradition has been to go to the movies alone. But for, that's 20 years ago now, 21 years ago now. So obviously there's years where that has not been the case. Sometimes I've just gone to the movies, and there was a few years where I missed going for reasons I will get into. But generally that was that. And it's because I just hate Thanksgiving. As I got older, one of the reasons I hated it was ideological. It's a holiday that is sort of about this fake mythologized version of America where the Pilgrims and the Native Americans, but they were usually called Indians when I was hearing the Thanksgiving myth as a kid, got together and had a nice meal. I know the comedian Bill Maher once said that the idea of the American myth of Thanksgiving was like a date rapist telling his victim, let's just focus on the nice dinner we had earlier. And that's kind of the whole thing, where it ignores, the smallpox infected blankets and the genocide and the stealing of the land and all that stuff. And that the Pilgrims were the Puritans, religious zealots. So, not the nicest thing. So ideologically, I hated it. But ever since I was a kid, I hated it for a very simple reason, which is that I am an extremely picky eater, as those of you who know me from Tawk back then know. And it's a holiday that is really just centered around food. I mean, yeah, sure, there's football games and family and whatever, but it's a food holiday. It's a holiday where people come together to cook and then gorge themselves. And so being a picky eater, that never really appealed to me. So if we go back to my childhood, so I was raised by my mother for most of it. And so I would go over when I was really young to one of my aunt's places where my entire mother's side of the family would go. And I was usually stuck at the kids' table with two cousins, brother and sister, that were around my age. One was 8 months older than me, the woman, and one was 1 or 2 years younger than me, and that was the boy. And I always resented that as time went on, I was still stuck at the kids' table with the younger cousin, while the older cousin, who was only 8 months older than I, was allowed at the regular table. And she was also allowed to do the grown-up activities, like play Pictionary and Scattergories with the adults, whereas I wasn't. And I assumed, well, there's a few reasons, I'm sure, for that. Maybe it was a maturity thing. I mean, I know now that I'm on the spectrum, but back then I may have just come across as fucking spazzy and immature. But I also always thought or suspected that most of my family on my mother's side just plain didn't like me. So I know one of my uncles definitely did not like me. But otherwise, I mean, maybe they didn't actively hate me, but I think they just didn't like me. So I think I sensed that. So, I'd be dragged. I always dreaded it and hated the day, even though it was a day off of school, where I'd have to go to this thing. And then my mother's side of the family is mostly Italian. There's some Portuguese mixed in there and stuff. But a big Italian family, so they're big on the manja and the fucking eating and stuff. So there'd be that. And there was always, even though at some point they had just given up on me eating things that outside of my wheelhouse, there was always still this a side glance askew of like, yeah, he doesn't eat and it's, whatever. And so there was always like that judgy thing. It wasn't a very accepting environment. So I never really felt accepted. I felt judged, and because my slightly older cousin was eventually allowed to play the reindeer games with the adults and I wasn't, that also felt like a certain rejection, which probably goes to my lifelong feeling of feeling rejected in many ways. So I always hated it growing up, and that happened for, let's say, like the first 11 or 12 years of my life. That's what Thanksgiving was like. I think there was maybe 1 year where we didn't go and spend it with my larger mother side of the family. There was a brief period when I was around like the second or third grade age where my mother was married to this scumbag car salesman guy. And so I think there was 1 year that we went over to his family. And I remember I spent most of that Thanksgiving bored and in a room of my mother's parent-in-law's like whatever, rumpus room or whatever, just like riding in like an exercise bike just out of boredom. And then I would go back into the dining room where they were eating, and one of the relatives of the scumbag was like this older guy who was just sloshed out of his mind. I remember him slurring drunkenly, saying like, "What's this skinny prick doing here?" or something. So, lovely. But that was mostly what that was. Oh, and also my elementary school, usually on like the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, they had their own like mini Thanksgiving thing where like half of the day was just spent in the cafeteria fucking eating food that I wouldn't eat, and they made us dress up like pilgrims or Indians, quote unquote, Native Americans. That's problematic. They probably don't do that anymore. Well, this was like early 90s. So that was not good. Or late 80s, early 90s. So that was also a thing where it's like, oh, I have to go to school, and half of the day is just going to be me turning down turkey and corn or whatever, and it's just like I'm not learning anything. There's like no recess. I'm not enjoying anything. I'm just literally sitting here in a construction paper pilgrim's hat. So that sucked. And then when my maternal grandfather died, which was October of 95, I believe. So I'm about like 12, 13 at this point. I think I'm 12. My mother's side of the family split a bit. It was basically three families that were based on like my grandmother and her two sisters. And they came together as a cohesive family unit. And then when my grandfather died, it sort of split off where one of the sisters and their family kind of did their own thing for at least Thanksgiving. Where it was my super right-wing aunt and uncle that I know now are super right-wing, and their two children. They're my older cousins who are about the age of like my mom's age, and then it would be the other two sisters, my grandmother and my other great aunt, and that included like the younger cousins around my age and stuff. And it was kind of just the same thing where it's just I didn't like it because I was bored, and it's about eating, and I feel judged for not eating, and all of this stuff. And, in fairness, I mean, I didn't know I was on the spectrum at that point. I'm sure my family didn't. They just thought I was, I don't know, maybe they thought I was special, quote unquote. And they just kind of gave up on it, or they thought my picky eating would change. But because at that point, we're talking late 80s, early 90s, your frame of reference for autism at that point is Dustin Hoffman and Rain Man. It's a mathematics savant who can help you win at blackjack and is worried about Wapner. It's, they're not expecting, some guy who hyperfixate on movies and only wants to eat chicken tendies. So I just didn't feel wanted or liked or anything like that. So, So I still had to put up with that for a while. I think, and then in my teen years, my mother had long ago divorced the scumbag car salesman, and in my early teens, like 13, 14, she did get engaged to this scumbag alcoholic bodybuilder guy, and I think we may have gone over his family one Thanksgiving as well, but I don't remember that as clearly. And then later, a couple years later, in my later teens, she married this other guy who was actually a pretty decent guy. And so I think we went over his family sometimes too. But so basically it was either my mother's side of the family or the family of whatever person my mother was dating at the time. But it was always kind of the same thing, where it was just, it's still a holiday around eating, and I don't want to eat because I'm picky, and that this is the whole thing. I think the one positive I might be able to, and I don't quite remember this very clearly, but I do, one of the older cousins, they were really into Mystery Science Theater 3000, and back in my childhood days, Mystery Science Theater on Comedy Central would have a special Thanksgiving Day special, the Turkey Day special. So I'm not sure if it was the first time, but I may have been introduced to Mystery Science Theater through this older cousin who was closer to like my mother's age. So during one of these times, because that was really the only time I was ever over that particular aunt and uncle's house was on Thanksgiving. So if that's the case, then that one older cousin who is the closest person on that side of the family to my personality may have introduced me to that. So that's the one bright thing. But anyway, so that's like the whole thing. Don't like Thanksgiving, picky eater. So 2001, I have turned 18. And it's my first year of college. It's my first semester of college. 9/11 happened like my second week of classes, my first week of classes. And I am in a bad place mentally and emotionally. I'm like suicidally depressed. My life had changed because I had high school with friends, and then suddenly I'm in college, and not all my friends went to the same college. And my mother being fucking mentally ill and everything. I moved around so much in my life, like always within like the same 3 towns in Rhode Island. But I'd moved a few times that year for various reasons. So there was just no stability there, and I was super depressed, and life was not going well. And at that point, I had a car, I was able to drive, so I'm like, you know what, fuck it, I am ducking out of this Thanksgiving thing. And so I went to the second-run theater. Second-run theaters don't really exist anymore for obvious reasons, but basically, back then, a movie would play in normal theaters during its theatrical run, and then a couple months later, after it had finished its initial theatrical run, but before it would get released on home video for rental on VHS, it would go to a second-run theater. Or DVD. It would go to a second-run theater, which were usually tickets were like $1 or $2. Concessions were still normal prices, but the movie tickets themselves were cheaper, and you could see this new movie for a discount before it hit home video on the big screen. And that's when I went to go see Shallow Hal, the Jack Black Farley Brothers movie. And so I absconded from family obligations. I was like, I don't want to do this, so I'm not going to. And I just went to the movies by myself, and I had a very fun time. Because movies are, I love movies more than almost every member of my mother's side of the family. Like, all of them, let's be honest. And even though it was like misprojected so that I could see the boom mic during most of the scenes, because they didn't have the masking correctly on the projector or anything, I still enjoyed that. I think I still went to family after the movie, after the fact. But I went to like just a matinee show, this movie, and going to the movies alone made sense. Because, one of the few things in my life that I'm most thankful for are movies. Movies don't hate you, or they don't judge you, they don't reject you, they don't leave you. There's always a movie to see. Movies are always there for you. There's always a new movie, and if you don't want to watch a new movie, there's always a familiar old movie you can watch. They're the one constant that won't let me down in life. And so after that, I decided that was going to be my yearly tradition. I'm going to avoid all of this family bullshit and feeling like I'm not wanted and feeling like I'm judged. And I'm just going to go to the movies alone. And to an extent, this was sometimes altered. And I'll go into how it was altered. So when I was, I want to say 19, I was either still 18 about to turn 19 or I just turned 19. But my father died. Now, my parents had me, I was a teenage pregnancy. My mother raised me. My father wasn't really part of my life until he joined in my teen years, and things happened, and I pushed him out. And so I wasn't on speaking terms with him when he died. I would later find out that a lot of the stuff my mother told me about my father were complete lies because she's fucking crazy. So after he died, I got closer to my father's side of the family, especially because I had like a half sister who was only a couple years old. She was really young and everything. So after my father died, I would spend more time and more holidays with them. So I would still go to see my Thanksgiving movie alone early, but then after that, I would normally go to my my paternal grandparents' place where my father's side of the family all hung out. And it was like night and day between how they were together and how my mother's side of the family were together. Like, my mother's side of the family, I never really felt love or warmth there. It always felt like people were thrown together because they felt like it was an obligation or a duty because they're related that they have to be together. But I never got the feeling that they enjoyed the holiday or each other's company. It just seemed like a perfunctory, like going to the DMV. Like, there was just no love there, really. And then my father's side of the family, when I spent Thanksgiving or Christmas is out of scope for this particular episode, but like Thanksgiving, it was more like Norman Rockwell-ish. And some of that might be how big the family is. So my father was one of 5 children. So even after he passed away, there were still 4, aunts and uncles there. And some of them had young kids, like middle school and younger. And at this time, I'm like late teens, early 20s for most of this. So there's children, there's just a feeling. Sometimes they had like friends of the family, not just family, and everyone was together and laughing, and it just felt like a more warm environment and pleasant. And despite the fact that my father's side of the family are mostly politically conservative, I have never not felt accepted by them, despite being the atheist communist that I am. Like, they would say, like, grace before turkey, and no one ever, like, looked askance or judged me for just being silent and not saying it with them. Sometimes they would, like, good-naturedly, like, rib me about eating, like, can I offer you something or whatever, but it didn't have, like, the acid tinge that my mother's side of the family had with that. When they were trying to like force food on me or attempt to guilt me into having food, it definitely felt more jovial with them. And so it just felt like an environment where I felt more welcome and I felt more loved, and it was just a better environment. So I don't miss Rhode Island where I grew up at all. I think the entire state's a fucking cesspool, and I am happy every single day that I left it, and I have no desire to ever step foot back there again. But sometimes I do miss spending holidays with them, and I wish they would maybe at their second home in Florida have holidays there, because I can get to Florida easier than I can get to Rhode Island. But regardless, so normally for many years, I would just go see my movie alone, and then I would visit my paternal grandparents' place after the fact. And that also helped me sort of stay close to my sister a little bit, because we're not close right now, not since I moved to North Carolina. But at least I got to see her a little bit more, and so it was just kind of nice. So I did a hybrid thing, basically. I did my own little thing, and then I did the family thing after. The first year that I was in danger of breaking the tradition was in 2008. I had been in a car accident. I forget if it was my first or my second with that particular car, but my car was in the shop. So I couldn't drive myself anywhere. In 2008, this is before Uber and Lyft and ride shares and everything. I guess I could have called a cab, but, So I had no way of getting to the movie theater, so I thought I was going to ruin it. But I had a very good friend, and she was a great friend, and I do miss her. But she was very good to me, and she helped me out in many ways in that time of my life. Because this was 2008. I'm still depressed. I'm still in my 20s. I'm in my mid-20s at the time. I'm like 25 at this point, I think. And I was pretty severely clinically depressed for like the vast majority of my 20s. But she knew about my tradition and that I was upset that I was going to miss it. And so she had Thanksgiving with her family. And then at night, she came and picked me up. And we went to a movie theater where she knew the manager, so we got in for free, and we saw a Thanksgiving movie. Now, the movie was Twilight, so it sucked, but at least I kept the streak going, and it was all thanks to her, and there was a lot that she did for me in that, like, 2008, 2009 period of my life, and I miss her, because we don't talk anymore, not because we had a falling out or anything, just certain circumstances, but I hope she's doing well. And then the next year was actually the first year I did break the tradition, and that was 2009. And because there wasn't much that was playing in the theater in November around Thanksgiving time, But I was looking forward to seeing the movie The Road with Viggo Mortensen, the adaptation of the Cormac McCarthy novel. And it was in limited release, and it was supposed to open wide on Thanksgiving, but it didn't open in any of the theaters I could drive to near me. So my choices were to not see anything at all and break the tradition, or to just go see some random bullshit that I didn't want to see. And I ended up staying home, and I didn't, so the tradition was broken. And, I think my depression at the time was also involved with that, so, and then the next big change of the tradition was when I met my long-term girlfriend after that. I think I had met her in 2012. And that woman, I had met her in Rhode Island, and when she moved to North Carolina, I moved as well. A lot of people, including my most recent ex, used to say it was like, oh, well, you moved for a girl, you moved for her. And that's not quite true. She was more a means to an end. I really just kind of needed to get out of Rhode Island, and I wanted an excuse to quit the job I was working at the time because I hated that fucking job. It was the job I mentioned in the Tosh video I made, the job I fucking hated. So that was the main reason. I always hated when my most recent ex was like, well, you moved for a girl and you wouldn't move for me, because she had to move a couple hours away from where I am now for her job working for war criminals. And I didn't move there, but she was also moving to bumfuck nowhere. This is some bullshit military town. So yeah, she always threw that back at me, and it was like, that's not the reason. And no matter how many times I tell you it was about these other factors, you still throw this back at me. But neither here nor there. But so when I started dating this woman, she would normally cook Thanksgiving for her roommates and some of her friends. So the first year, 2012, I believe it was still Rhode Island, and I still kept the tradition going. Went to see, I believe it was Silver Linings Playbook that year was my Thanksgiving movie. And then I went after, and I spent the rest of Thanksgiving with her. And then once we moved down, so the first year we moved down, so it was 2013, I believe. So I moved down in September of 2013 to North Carolina, so 2 months later, it's Thanksgiving. I didn't have a job at the time because I just moved down, and I believe the movie I went to see then, because I did still see a movie that first time, I believe it was The Hunger Games Catching Fire. So I went to go see that, the earliest show they had, like 11 a.m. or whatever, came back, and we did the Thanksgiving thing. After that, two things took place that broke my tradition for a number of years I was with her, because I was with this woman for close to 5 years, a little shy of 5 years, I think. Right? Maybe it was 4. I'm trying to think. 2012 to 2016 when we broke up. So, yeah, it was it was slightly more than 4, but not quite 4.5. But two things happened. One is that she was not the best person and kind of selfish and manipulative. So she would get upset if I wanted to go see my Thanksgiving movie. And then also, once 2014 hit, I got a job, and that job was working at a movie theater. And so sometimes I wouldn't see a movie on Thanksgiving because I'd be working at the movie theater. And Thanksgiving Day is one of the best holidays, probably the best holiday to work at the movies, because it's the one holiday that is dead at the movie theater. Like, tons of people go to see movies on Black Friday, tons go to see it on Christmas, Lord knows. But Thanksgiving Day, for some reason, was always super slow. So it was, if you had to work a holiday during holiday season in the winter, you definitely want to work Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day is dead, and Thanksgiving night is slightly less dead, but still pretty dead. So normally, like, my theater would put up like a chart, and you could rank which of the holidays you most want to work and least want to work to try to compensate. And so it'd always be like number 1, the one I most want to work, Thanksgiving Day. And so normally that would either be, I'd be scheduled for the day shift, and then my ex at the time would do the dinner thing a little bit later. More often than not, because it'd be slightly busier, I'd end up working the night shift, and so the thing would be earlier. But so there were many years where I was with her, like 20, I guess not many years. It was probably like 14, 15, 16, I think, where I didn't see a movie on Thanksgiving for her-related reasons. And then we broke up in December of 2016, and then 2017, I was completely alone for that year. No girlfriend, no nothing. So I'm pretty sure. So in 2017, I had also gotten a better job because after we had broke up, she threw me out of the house, and I was homeless for a little bit. And I was just staying with a couple of friends who I had met working at the theater, and they're the only reason that I wasn't living out of my car. So I'll always be grateful for them letting me crash at their place for 6 months in 2017. But after that, I got a better job that was better paying, and I can afford my own place, and I moved into my own place and whatever. But because, this relationship had ended, and in hindsight, I'm happy it ended because it was toxic as fuck, and that woman was extremely emotionally manipulative and abusive to me in hindsight. But I was still hurting and alone and lost, and so I ended up working the job that paid my bills, the bigger job I got, and then I still kept the theater job with that I only worked on weekends. So for a while, my schedule was that I worked Monday through Thursday at the main job. I had Fridays off because I worked 10-hour shifts instead of 8-hour shifts. So I basically had 4 10s in a 3-day weekend. And then Friday would be my day off. And then Saturday and Sunday, I would normally work at the theater the afternoon and night shift on Saturday and then the early shift on Sunday. And that was how I did. I just figured if I just overworked myself, then I wouldn't have time to be depressed or think of whatever. So I don't remember that year's Thanksgiving. I don't know if I worked that year or if I saw a movie, but I'm fairly certain I worked because I don't remember specifically. And then I quit the theater in April of 2018 just because I didn't need the gas money anymore because that's really all that job was giving me for 2 days at part-time pay. And then a month after that, I met my now ex-fiance, who I was together with for 4.5 years. And then when I was with her, it was a little bit where I would go with her to spend Thanksgiving with her family. And then after that, like the entire family would go to the movie theaters. We wouldn't always see the same movie, but usually we'd all go. Or her father and her brother would stay home and watch football, then I'd go with her and her mother to the movies. So a lot of those years, I still got to see a movie, I just didn't see it alone. For instance, last year, I saw House of Gucci with her and her mother. And so within that, I'd say there was 2009, where the tradition was broken because the road didn't open anywhere near me. And then there were the years I was with the abusive ex, where either it was her not wanting me to go, or it was me working a theater shift that kept me from the tradition. And then after that, it's kind of been a tradition where ever since I've still been there. So I'd say probably overall, let's see, there was 2014, 2015, 2016, and let's say 2017, and then 2009. So that's 5 years out of 21 that I missed seeing a movie. I may have missed some with my most recent ex, because she was big on Black Friday shopping. She was really big on that. And so sometimes we wouldn't necessarily see a movie after Thanksgiving dinner. We would just go to the stores when they opened. But then the last few years, stores have been like, let's give our employees Thanksgiving off. And which is probably the right thing to do. And I know I'm weirdly saying that because going to the movie theater employees do not have that off, and I know because I worked it. So I understand my kind of hypocrisy there, but movies are also open. They're 365. They're open on Christmas Day too. So, and I tip well on that day if I'm going to Alamo or something. So that's been my tradition there. That has been what I have done. And, this year, 2022, it's the first time I've been single in 4.5 years now. And so once again, I am alone, and I don't have any family in the area, and even if I did, I still probably wouldn't want to spend the whole day with them anyway, because I still just fucking hate Thanksgiving. And while I have friends, and some friends would probably let me tag along to theirs, it's still, again, I don't like the holiday. So I will be spending Thanksgiving alone. I will go to the movies. I already have my ticket to go see Glass Onion, the Knives Out sequel, early. And then on the years where I've spent Thanksgiving alone, since about 2013 or so, because this started with the other ex, That's when I started eating bacon and really liked bacon. And so it's also been sort of a secondary Thanksgiving tradition for me that I would just make a big plate of bacon and wash it down with a bottle or two of beer. And so my plan for this year is to continue that, where I'm going to go see my movie. I'll probably get concessions during the movie because if the wait staff has to work on Thanksgiving, they deserve a tip. So I'll probably get, something and probably a cocktail, because why not? And I'll come home, and later that night I'll make myself my bacon and drink my beer, and that's going to be my day. And so the tradition continues, almost unbent, unbowed, unbroken. So that is just kind of what I wanted to talk about, because while this isn't as movie specific, this is a lot more my background. So sorry if this got too personal for anybody. But I figured since Thanksgiving is equated with movies to me, specifically as a movie holiday, because of how I used movies to escape hated family obligations, I thought I'd talk about it on my little movie series thing. So, I don't know if anybody else out there does this. I know it's more common, I think, for families to go to the movies on Christmas. And I know this from personal experience, both on the consumer side and on the movie theater employee side, because the theaters got packed on Christmas night. It seems like, I guess it doesn't happen during Thanksgiving, maybe because of football, but on Christmas, it's sort of like, I guess, after the kids have opened their presents in the morning and after you've had Christmas lunch or Christmas dinner, you're sick of tired of your fucking family, and you just want to go somewhere where you don't have to talk to them. So, yeah, I've probably been more consistent in going to the movies on Christmas, but my last two exes both had the one thing in common, that they were both gung-ho about Christmas, and Christmas lost a lot of its magic for me after my grandfather died when I was like 13. Because that also, aside from breaking up the Thanksgiving, that also kind of broke up the Christmas celebrations. And so while I liked getting gifts and all that stuff, it hasn't felt magical since. And I mean, this year I'll be spending Christmas alone, and no one's buying me presents this year. But conversely, I don't have to buy anybody else presents either. So I'm probably just going to buy myself some presents, and, because I'm not buying tacky luxury goods that my most recent ex liked, like ugly ass Louis Vuitton shit and other shit that she's just selling on Poshmark now anyway. So I because I don't have anyone to buy luxury goods for. I mean, I guess that's maybe a cheap shot because my nerd shit is also super expensive. But I'll probably just buy myself some super expensive nerd shit and treat myself this Christmas. But that's a story later. I don't know. Maybe I'll talk about that on another one as we get closer. Anyway, if you sat through all of this personal thing that I did because it's cheaper than therapy, thank you. So coming up, let's see, there's the Vinegar Syndrome Black Friday sale, but chances are I'm not going to get anything from that delivered until like mid to late December, knowing how they go. So there probably won't be an unboxing for like another month still. But I had a lot of vacation days this year at work that I did not take. So even after the ones that I can roll over for next year, I still had to take a bunch. So the last 2 full weeks of December, I am off of work. And I don't have anywhere to go. I have nothing to do. So maybe during that time, since I'll have nothing else to do, maybe I'll finally record a Dave's Faves video or something as far as like putting videos out there, because that's going to be fucking 10 working days, like 14 calendar days or more, really, or I have to like no plans and nothing to do. I mean, I guess I'll probably have some company over at some point, but still nothing. So I don't know. But thanks for listening. And, like, share, subscribe, do all the things. And I'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks, everybody. Take care.